cryptocurrency. Take it away, Patrick.
I have a not so fun topic. Well, I guess it's interesting. But I want to talk a little, I was mentioning to Jason, sort of consumerism. This idea that, it means lots of things, but to me, just the fact that you tend to want to buy things which don't last, and then you have to like kind of keep buying for various reasons. And being in the tech industry, I think this hits a lot, that we keep hearing about the new phones that come out every month, every week. It seems like all the time. And it's always, ooh, now my phone is outdated. I could buy this one that's a little bit better. But if that's your criteria, you sort of always have to keep buying new phones and always upgrading your stuff. And of course, like we use a lot of our technology to do our work. Having a laptop, having a computer is sort of necessary to doing work. So some of that's understandable. But as sort of just in general, I try to be somewhat frugally minded in order to conserve the money that I get for doing my work by not spending all of it.
I look at it
go ahead.
The same way. I mean, I look at money as work. So it's like, is this new phone going to be worth, X amount of hours of work? And like, if you think about it in that way, it's often, like not necessary to get the very latest phone if you have the second latest.
Yeah, so that's one way I've heard described, which actually there's several apps I know of where you can sort of calculate based on how much you expect to make this year, what your sort of hourly rate is. If you're paid hourly, it's of course easy. But if you're not paid hourly, you can sort of figure out what your hourly rate is and actually see sort of how many hours of work this is.
Yeah, the other part of it is, and maybe this is, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I actually use the hourly rate of my first job, like my first real job. And I haven't really changed from that. So that way it's like, as if I get any raises or anything, that like hopefully I can save that, or that tends to get eaten up by like family things that you can't really control.
So how long you'd have to work to earn this thing? I mean, I guess I had a pretty low paying first job, so that might be really depressing for some things.
I mean, your first full-time job.
Oh, full-time job. Okay, all right.
Oh, yeah, I don't count like, in high school, I, sold popcorn or something. Yeah, I don't really count that.
Okay. I was going to say, that's going to be pretty bad. So another way of doing that I've heard someone describe, which this is, I guess, a slightly nerdy way, is if you talked about putting, how much money would you have to put aside as like a sort of, you could talk about like an annuity or an investment. Like if you say the stock market returns on average 7%, as like a gross simplification of this guy's scheme, if you say the stock market on average returns 7%, if you wanted to put enough money away so that you didn't use the capital for a purchase, but just the interest, how big would it need to be relative to how long you'll use the item? So if you say, I'm going to buy a car and I expect to drive my car 5 years, and a car costs $10,000, how much money would you have to put away so that you would earn $10,000 over 5 years off of that investment?
Oh, I see, like passive income. Like what would you have to do to get $10,000 of passive income?
That's right. So if you put, $100,000 and earned 5% on it, I'm simplifying the numbers just to make them easier, then you're saying that's $5,000 a year. So if I put $100,000 in an account that earned 5%, then I could use that money to buy something that costs $5,000 once a year.
That makes sense. And if you could get all of your expenses in passive income, then you don't have to work anymore.
Bingo.
That's part of it.
Yes.
So for people who don't know, passive income means like active income is your W-2. Like, in high school, I sold popcorn. And at the end of the day, I got a paycheck for that work.
Sorry, we have foreign people. They won't know what a W-2 is.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. It means you actively went out and you did a job and you got a salary and your boss or somebody paid you for that work, right? Passive income is I mean, it's really investing, but it's more than that. Basically, any way where you can put in money and take out more money without doing any work beyond just
it's something that doesn't take your active
stuff.
Attention. So like if you made a website that earned advertising revenue, you put in, it isn't really earning active income because you worked on it, but the amount you make isn't really per se related to how much work you put into it. It's sort of earning it passively.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's a lot of ways to sort of think about that. You could earn for many, many years off of some website article that you wrote. even though you only spent, a couple hours working on it. And if that ratio is pretty good, like if you spent, 1,000 hours working on it and earned only a few pennies over the lifetime, obviously that's still passive income, but it was not a very good return on your investment.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so that's the second way of looking at it, is sort of this passive income sort of like investment strategy, so that you get all your expenses covered. So like Jason said, you don't have to actively work anymore. That would be awesome. But that's also pretty scary, because for expensive things, you pretty quickly figure out you need sort of a large amount of money saved up to afford it.
Yep.
Then the other sort of way that I was just talking to Jason about this before the show is I ran across an article many years ago. Unfortunately, the original article hasn't actually been updated because it's become even worse. But it says it had a list of all of the Apple products up until that date, their initial price, and then what would you have in value of Apple stock if you had bought that many dollars of Apple stock instead of that item. So, the example here I found that's updated is if you bought the first iPod, which came out in 2001. So for some of you, you'd be like, oh, that was forever ago, but some of us remember that.
Yeah.
In 2001, if you bought the first iPod, it cost $400 at the time. But now, if you had bought $400 of Apple stock at that time instead of the iPod, you would have had basically $39,000, almost $40,000.
Keep in mind, it's a bit of survivor bias.
Yes,
right?
no, there's a ton of survivor bias.
Like if you had bought the Motorola stock for the Motorola Zoom instead of the iPod, then you would have, I don't know, probably close to nothing.
Well, the one I use is, I used to have this, I don't even know if the brand's around, Rio MP3 player.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
So I bought like this, there used to be pretty popular, these Rio MP3 players. If you bought Rio stock, it'd be worthless. But at least you would have had an MP3 player instead. It's absolutely survivorship bias. Totally. Kind of an interesting...
But yeah, even if you bought like an index or something, you would have probably doubled your money by now.
It depends on when in 2001 for that specific instance.
Point. That's a really good point.
But in general, this is just saying, if you buy the consumerism topic, you buy an iPod, you buy an iPhone, you buy an iPad, you buy an Android phone, and you use them for only a couple, 3 years, and then you might sell them to somebody else and you get a little bit back, but they're mostly worthless after that. Versus if you sort of, save up that money or invest it, it sort of is continuing to earn and becomes worth more and more. Interesting ways of sort of, I try to limit, because I think our culture, well, some people say sort of it's important for our culture to have people spend a lot of money. That's how the economy grows. But as an individual, it's also very dangerous, because this is like some PSA or something, but it's also very dangerous to spend a lot of money, right? Spending money you don't have, being forced to have to continue to work for more years than you would like to because you spent instead of saved, and those things didn't last. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. There's a bit of a tragedy of the commons, right? Like if everyone starts becoming frugal, basically, if you bought stock in Apple went up. Why did Apple go up? Because other people bought iPhones. Yeah, and why did the stock keep going up? Because people kept buying iPhones. Like the stock wouldn't have kept going up after 2007 or 2008 if everyone had just stuck with the first iPhone for 3 or 4 years, right? So it's sort of like, you need people to keep buying things so that you can profit on your investments. But as an individual, you don't want to get caught up in it yourself, so to speak. One thing I found kind of interesting is the cost of living across countries. And even for just bare essentials, the cost varies just enormously. And I found this thing called the Purchasing Power Parity Index, the PPP. And it'll show you, for basic, milk and all sorts of other things, how much those things cost in other countries, right? And it just kind of boggles my mind, why there's such an enormous difference. Like why should, milk or water or just simple, like rice cost just 10 times as much in one country than another. I talked to someone at work about this, and they were saying things like, oh, you have to ship it or you have to grow it, and the land is more expensive and the labor is more expensive. And I could kind of see it, but it still kind of boggles my mind. I still don't understand why you couldn't just ship just a ton of rice from a place where it's cheaper to grow and ship it to the US. And I don't really understand where the 10x comes from.
But does it include things like taxes and tariffs?
I'm sure it does, right? Because it's what the consumer pays, so it includes everything. But yeah, I mean, maybe that's the answer. I mean, I'm under the impression that there aren't really a lot of tariffs on food, and food isn't taxed. At least I don't think so. Like when you go to the grocery store, you don't pay taxes at least.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like in Europe, like do you pay like the VAT tax even on like food and stuff? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I know in the U.S. you don't. But either way, it's like, 10 times as much. It just doesn't really make any sense. It's one of these things that kind of always boggles my mind because, you hear a lot about people saying like outsourcing, right? Like people are going to do work in this other country because it's cheaper, right? And I mean, obviously some of that is maybe there's like certain luxuries that people have in one country and not another. But even just the basic staples of like just the basic food and things like that are just massively different across countries. So somebody could potentially have like a more luxurious life with far less income in another country than they can in one country than they can in another. And that part doesn't really make sense to me. It seems like there would be some kind of arbitrage there or something.
Well, but for some stuff like food, there's probably also regulation about testing and quality control and stuff, right? So like you brought, well, milk has like perishable problems, but if you took something like rice, like it might be that the rice you find in one of these things that's 1/10 of what it is in another place, the quality control. Now, you may argue that it doesn't matter, like you don't actually end up with a better product, but it might be that there's certain certificates required and testing to be done, and all of that things adds costs. And that prevents someone from easily sort of taking the cheap rice in country A and just bringing it to country B because country B has essentially deliberately made that not possible in some way. Or else somebody would arbitrage it, right? Somebody would, if the transport costs and all of that stuff lined up, would take stuff from place A and sell it in place B.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it must be like regulation. Also, there are things that I don't know if they even can be. So, for example, I have a lot of family in Europe, and they'll go to different countries for medical procedures, right? But in America, that doesn't happen. Like if you need, some kind of surgery, you're not going to go shopping around at different countries. And the reason why is because it's like so heavily regulated. Like you basically need to have your insurance subsidize your healthcare, and they're not going to subsidize a procedure in another country. And so in this way, it's kind of regulated. I mean, the legal system is also in the same way regulated, right? Like it's not a malicious thing. It's just the nature of it. Like there's a set of U.S. laws that's different. And so you can't just go to another country. You can't outsource your like legal department. And so maybe these things just add like cost, like the fact that you can't really outsource legal and medical stuff, that cost percolates into everything else. Like even if you run a rice farm, or even if you're a rice importer, if someone in your ship gets sick or something, you have to pay like an extraordinary fee or something.
All right, well, is it time for the news?
Food for thought. I found this stuff interesting. I don't have any good answers. My news is way less high concept. It's basically, I won't go into a whole bunch of detail. There's this thing called a Mandelbrot set. It's a recursive equation, and because it's a recursive equation, you can plot this equation, and it's a generative equation, which means it's like the Fibonacci sequence, right? It builds on itself. And somebody just kept building it and calling it many times. And they zoomed into the Mandelbrot set by a factor of 2 to the 760th power. That is a lot of zoom. And you can literally watch for, I think it's 10 minutes of just this, like just you entering this Mandelbrot set and just this vortex of different patterns. And I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, if you've never seen fractals in the Mandelbrot, Julia set, stuff like that before, it's a rabbit hole to go down, I guess. But it is pretty interesting that the sort of crime scene, zoom in on this image and enhance, you really can't here because it's all mathematically defined. So you just keep running the equation for sort of arbitrary levels of, I guess, precision. And then you can just keep going further and further and further, smaller and smaller things. If you sort of try to do one of these naively, you run into a lot of problems with arithmetic stability, because you start getting into really tiny numbers. So you have to be very careful in how you represent them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to do this sort of shift where all your numbers are like, e to the negative 200, but you're not even storing that anymore. You're just kind of storing all the numbers relative to each other. And I can only guess at how to do that, but it's super interesting. It's kind of fun to watch.
Wow, this video really does just go on. I'm watching it now. I'm sort of distracted.
It's like legit. It's 10 minutes of just diving into a fractal.
I've seen ones where they sort of move it around, but in this one, they're not even moving it around. They're zooming in on exactly the same. Like, there's no translation. It's just straight zoom.
Yeah, it's wild.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm going to stop this.
All right, 10 minutes later.
I'm going to be here for 13 minutes. So we did a previous episode just recently on code reviews. And there was a post recently on Google's testing blog, which says it came from their testing on the toilet episode, that they had something about code health and talking about steps that you can do before you send out a code review. So we talked about a lot of how code reviews should be done, why it should be there. And only part of it is actually to kind of, I saw some other sort of discussions where online after that episode where people were talking about, does code review really improve your code? But I think actually improving your code is only one small aspect of what a code review is for. Yes, it's good to try to catch bugs, but that's not really, I don't want to say it's not the main purpose, but it is really not the only purpose. Almost, I would say, I'd have to think about it for a while. But close in importance is also the fact that you're getting someone else familiar with what you're doing, having a second opinion, just engaging with other people on your team, right? And sharing what everyone's up to and what they're working on. And also allowing for easy sort of learning and mentorship between people. All of those are useful purposes. But here, the Google blog was talking about that the best reviews are probably the ones where you don't get a lot of feedback or you don't have to, iterate through many times. And so they had a bunch of tips about things to do before you start and then things to do when you're sort of addressing comments to prevent things from spiraling out of control. And I thought it was pretty good. I'm not going to read all of them because that'd be kind of boring. You can just go read the blog post yourself. But a couple of them don't make it
great.
Yeah, don't make them too big. And then the ones that, everyone probably says they should do, but doesn't always do, which is I tried to do sort of upload, if your tool supports it, upload the review and go through it yourself first and make sure you didn't miss any obvious things like leaving in test code or, having a file where you were changing some stuff and decided to do something different and you forgot to revert it, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for people who don't know, testing on the toilet is this thing that I'm sure other companies do it, but I first heard about it at Google and from Google. And basically, apparently in their bathrooms, they have instructions on, how to be a better software engineer. So while you're, sitting in the restroom, you can look at it.
Giving you, okay, interesting. Yeah. Reviewing tips.
Yeah. Okay, so my news is, second news is 3D bin packing for 3D printer mass production. So the idea is, let's say you have a 3D printer, you want to make a bunch of little trinkets, maybe you want to make a bunch of cool toys for all of your cousins, but you want to do it in one print job. Like you want to set it, you want to, do something else, come back, in 12 hours and have it be done with, 10 of them instead of having to print one, take it off the machine, print another one. So this person did 3D bin packing and kind of explored that and ways to do that efficiently, right? And so for people who don't know, bin packing is where you have a certain space. So imagine like 2D bin packing. So you have a square, and then you have a bunch of things that are a bunch of polygons, and you need to fit as many of these polygons as possible into the square. Right, and there's different goals. Some might be the number of polygons. It might be you want the total area to be consumed as much as possible. And so that's the bin packing problem. And there's no, it's an NP complete problem, which means that there isn't a way to just do this fast, right? Like the only way to do it to make sure you got the best answer guaranteed is to literally try like every possible arrangement, right? That is pretty extreme. It's going to take a long time. It's never going to finish. So there's all sorts of bin packing algorithms that give you, approximately the best solution, as long as it's not some degenerate case. But there's no guarantee. But they run very fast. So one is simulated annealing. Simulated annealing is very simple. You start off by just randomly putting things in the box, and then you start swapping. You say, okay, take this piece out and see what I can put in its place. And if it's better, then do it. Like if you could take a piece out and put two in, then just do it, right? But if you could take a piece out and you can't put anything in its place, then sometimes do that anyways. Then they call this the temperature term. So sometimes you change the solution and you make it worse. And with some probability, you're going to take that worse solution. And the idea there is maybe it'll lead to an even better solution. And so over time, you're constantly taking things out, putting things back in. And as you do this, you're lowering the temperature to the point where the temperature is 0 and you're only making a swap if it's better. That's called simulated annealing. And this person implemented it in 3D. And it's kind of cool. You can actually see it figure out different ways to arrange objects so that he can print, 8 of them on one 3D print. So check it out. It's pretty cool.
The problem with all of that is my 3D printer isn't reliable enough that if I tried to do that, it would likely mess up, a third of the way through and just ruin the rest of it.
Oh, no. Got to get a new 3D printer.
Ooh, that's always the solution. We talked about this. That's consumer. No,
Oh, that's true. Well, yours is broken, so I think you're okay.
So my second article is a series of programming observations. I know it's not great, but the one I saw was pretty good because specifically about the nature of our podcast I thought was applicable. And apparently I'm in a very advice-giving mode today. First I talked about testing tips and about consumerism and anyways, whatever. It's a thing today. And this was a quote from this webpage that every 5 minutes you spend writing code in a new language is more useful than 5 hours of reading blog posts about how great that language is.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, so I saw this on Reddit. Someone had posted this, and I went to this page that also lists a bunch of these other things, like the likelihood of Perl being involved in a system is directly proportional to the length of time the system has been in maintenance.
Nice.
And they just have a bunch, probably like 10 of these things. I guess this is probably from a little while ago, but I hear us saying links to the Wayback Machine 2007, but most of these are still applicable. Think twice before presuming that CSV is a nice little easy file format to use.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, like CSV, commas...
A quote.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if you have a quote inside of a quote, so you use quotes in a CSV when you have, let's say, commas in the field, and so you want to quote the whole field, that way the commas don't mess up the rest of the file, right? But what happens if you have a quote inside of the quoted string? It turns out you have to actually, I think it's double quoted. And so if the CSV parser sees 2 quotes, it interprets as a literal quote. And that is just a very bad design decision. It turns into a total nightmare.
Yeah. Time for book of the show.
Book of the show. My book of the show is the first book I bought on Audible. Now that I've been using Audible on my shuttle ride, so it's called The Circle. It was pretty good. So I felt as if I have kind of a mixed review. On one hand, it started out amazing. The basic premise of the book, without spoiling anything, is this lady joins this company, and the company is very progressive, and they have all sorts of cool perks. There's like a strong company culture. There's like a badminton team, a basketball team. There's all these different organizations, and it feels kind of like joining a college campus or something. There's just so much to do. There's a lot of friendly people. There's all sorts of different activities, free food, all this stuff. And basically what she finds is that it's sort of taking over her life. And when she tries to pull back a bit, things kind of go south. And basically, it's an interesting book. The thing is, I feel as if the writer kind of ran out of steam. This is, I think, Dave Eggers. And I think he ran out of steam kind of halfway through the book, because it actually, like, I was really surprised because I'd gone halfway through the book, and then all of a sudden there was like a sex scene like described in the book. And it was just really, like, it didn't really fit at all. And then it just seemed like, I don't know if like that just put a bad taste in my mouth, but it seemed like after that, the book just turned into like a romance novel. Like, it was just, everything was about boyfriends and stuff like that. And the whole like thing about this company taking over this person's life was just kind of like, it was still there, but it's almost like there's all this extra filler. So, you know, it's a little bit of a slog to get through, to get to the ending. But it's a great story. The overall plot is great. And I skipped like a couple of sections. And with that, I would definitely read it again, or I would, you know, advertise other people to read it. But get ready for, you know, a little bit of mud to have to slog through. But overall, it was a good book.
Yeah, that I thought I was the only one who made these sort of like caveated recommendations.
I mean, well, you know, the thing is, like, it's sort of like if you give any type of review, you know, not everything is going to get 5 stars or 1 star.
Yeah.
Right? I would say this is like a 3 or 4 star.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So mine is a book that I had actually tried to read before, and didn't make it through. Like, started it, just kind of gave up. So I went back because I've had so many people sort of like online recommend this to me. Then at work, actually, somebody was telling me that they just think this book was amazing. And then actually someone else who I didn't even know was into sort of science fiction was chipping in that, oh yeah, this is a really good book. And it's always interesting with coworkers, you know, like you know how people are, but you don't necessarily know what their tastes in books are, or whether like sort of compatible with you. Like, you have to sort of calibrate against people, which sounds really weird. I don't mean that anything like weird. I just mean that,
no, I mean, so people are into different types of movies and stuff.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
some books are like very popular, and it's actually really hard. And I know that Netflix talked about this in one of a blog post I read from theirs, whoever knows how long ago. But that, like, if you watch a popular movie like The Lord of the Rings, that doesn't mean they can start recommending to you like another fantasy movie, because The Lord of the Rings was sort of like almost like a pop culture phenomenon.
Yeah,
it was like had mass appeal. But that doesn't mean that you're likely, like, what do they recommend to you? They could recommend to you other blockbusters, but they will probably recommend to you some probability of other fantasy movies, but it's probably not a strong recommendation.
Yeah, it's kind of like saying, you know, if someone says they like the Beatles, you don't start recommending a bunch of indie music.
Yeah. I don't know that much about the Beatles, but I'll just say yes.
The Beatles are kind of like Michael Jordan or something, where everyone just likes the Beatles.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you can't learn much. Anyways,
yeah, right.
So I don't think this is a super, super popular book, but it did win the Hugo Award. All right, cut to the chase. This is The Three Body Problem, by a Chinese author who I won't attempt to pronounce the name because I'm terrible at such things. But apparently this is the best-selling, or at least one of the best-selling authors in China. That it's a very, very popular person there. And this is not in Chinese. It's been translated. And the translation was really good, other than the fact that, the sort of names are preserved as best I can tell in sort of the English version of the Chinese name.
Okay.
What I mean there is that it isn't that they gave them like Alan and Bob, like they used the original Chinese name.
Oh, got it.
And it's large, but it's written in English letters. What is that called? Transcription, transliteration, that's something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, that's what you're saying.
And it was a good read because I felt like it was sort of inherently different than most of the other science fiction I read, which takes a sort of Western view of things. And so you sort of fall into, even if it's different authors with their own unique ideas, you sort of fall into these common tropes and common ways of acting and interacting with people. Mm-hmm. And so it was very nice to see something presented from a sort of different, it felt almost kind of this sounds bad, like a foreign view, something that isn't what I'm used to reading or what I'm used to experiencing. And it was nice to read a book that way, but it was still science fiction. It still had some of those same themes, but they were presented in sort of a fresh way. And so I thought that was an interesting read, but I won't say that it was my like most favorite read ever. But it was definitely and apparently so some people who I talked to didn't actually know there was more books to this, but apparently it's a trilogy, and this is the first book of a trilogy. And so I sort of expressed to one of my coworkers who had read all of the trilogy, like, I wasn't super enthused overall about it. And he sort of said, but this is kind of only the opening gambit, that like the real meat of the story takes place in second and third books, which I always find to be interesting for things which are trilogies, which is they really do need to hook you in or you're not going to read the second book. And so like, what do you do after you read the first book? Do you say, well, I'm going to give it a fair shake and read the second and third books? Am I going to give it a fair shake and only read the second book? Because then it's sort of unfortunate not to read the third. What do you do? Like, I probably wouldn't have gone ahead and tried again reading it if I had known it was going to be a trilogy. That sounds horrible.
I see.
Because now I'm in this awkward position.
Yeah, I see. I mean, it sounds like, it's really, you really have to trust that person who told you to read the second one,
But they really recommended the first book, but they recommended it in light of the whole trilogy. But I didn't know I was signing up for a full trilogy commitment. But they didn't tell me that it was only... Because, your memory is sort of skewed. Like, you remember the first book in light of what you learned in the second and third books.
Yeah.
It's like when you rewatch the Matrix movie... Oh, this is a dated reference. It's not the same as the first time you watch it.
Yeah. Because, you kind of have the whole context. You have a mental model of what's the...
Yeah. So, okay. That was a sort of a side tangent. But the three-body problem, it was definitely a fresh take. It was something that was different for me. And I enjoyed the experience of, trying something a little different and new. I don't give it's my highest marks, but I do think it was a good book.
Cool. That makes sense. And you can read both these mediocre books. Oh, man. Well, the thing is, we always report the books that we actually read. I mean, I actually saw recently a book that I thought was pretty cool. But I felt like I'm not going to mention it because I haven't read it yet. And, one thing that we try and do is we try to read every single book that we recommend. And we're started doing that on Audible. So if you want to check out Audible, you can go to audibletrial.com/programming throwdown. If you don't want to go on Audible, you can still support the show, by going to patreon.com/programming throwdown. And, we have links in the show notes. And we definitely appreciate all of you for checking out Audible and supporting us on Patreon.
And you can check out some of the other show notes for books we actually recommended. And maybe make those your first try.
Yeah, exactly. So my tool of the show is, as everyone knows, I got a 3D printer. And I've been super, super excited about that. I've been printing just unbelievable amounts of stuff. A lot of it is just cluttering, our whole house. But some of it, the things that really went over the best were these screw puzzles. So for people who don't know, a screw puzzle is basically, if you remember, these were really popular back in the day. I don't know if they're still popular, but remember that puzzle where there were the horseshoes, and the horseshoes have chain link connecting the two ends of the horseshoes to each other? Yeah. And there's a ring in like going around the chain, like a metal ring. And the ring, can't fit over either of the horseshoes to get out. But if you bend the horseshoes and the chain link in a certain way, then you can actually, create a surface that's narrow enough for the ring to escape. And so screw puzzles are basically that. They're ways for you to sort of turn objects in a way where you can either separate them or put them together. I mean, they're both effectively the inverse of each other, so they're both interesting. And so there's actually a Thingiverse blueprint for printing, I think, 5 screw puzzles, and they have different levels of difficulty. So the easiest is it looks like a bagel, but it's been cut in a certain way where you have to just screw the two pieces together to you get these two pieces that are just very oddly shaped, and if you just kind of try to put them together like two halves of a bagel, like it's just not going to look right. But if you kind of screw them into each other, you can actually create a bagel. Like it looks like a torus, right? And they have a bunch like that. They're super, super fun. The only thing, you have to sand it down. I actually cut my finger on one of them.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know. I mean, not badly. I mean, it didn't even break the skin, but it kind of like stings, and it's right on my fingertip, so it like stings when I type.
Cutting edge of science.
Yeah, that's right. It was super, super entertaining, especially after I sanded them down. I was able to give them to my family and let them try it out and stuff. So yeah, if you have a 3D printer, or I think on Thingiverse you can actually outsource it to someone with a lower purchasing parity index or whatever. you can through Thingiverse you can pay a certain fee, and they'll actually print it for you, or they'll figure out a way to print it for you and send it to you. So either way, if you have your own printer, or if you want to just go on there and pay someone to print it, I found them super fun, and I'm going to definitely get more of them.
My tool to show, as usual, is although you did just present a printed object, but mine is weird. So mine is Inbox from Gmail, and I know everybody knows about this, but I just wanted to, I guess, maybe rant a little bit for a second. But I feel spoiled by how nice. I really resonate with the Inbox way of doing things. I don't know what it is. It works for me. It makes sense to me. I've also used the Gmail with tabs, and I
that's the mail.google.com, right?
Yeah. I don't know. My mail.google.com I think redirects to Inbox now, but
okay.
I really do like Inbox. I like the fact that I can sort of do there used to be another project called Boomerang that you could use to do this in Gmail, but now Inbox does it directly, where you can sort of send an email message to go sort of archive itself and then come back to you in a certain amount of time. Yep. I use it all the time for hey, I need this to come back, but not right now. So I'll get an email from, this is not true, but my credit card is due at the end of the month. Well, I don't want to know about it at the beginning of the month. So, come back to me, 2 days before you're due. And then I can go online and pay this bill or whatever. But a couple of things. One is people who are still using the old school Gmail. It's just oh man, no, I feel like the Inbox is so much nicer. And the other thing is, I know people like the way things are because they're the way things are, but it's really frustrating for me to use other, my work mail is just I so much wish this would be more like Inbox or, whatever. It just feels so stuck in a dated way of doing things.
My only gripe with Inbox is that they haven't implemented filters yet. So I actually have to go to regular mail.
I will say I do that. That's
and
true.
Then put it back.
Man, you're making me. I'm now I have to give a mediocre recommendation for my tool of the month too.
4-star, 1 star just got knocked off. It's woo.
Okay, so I do balance them back off. So I really do like the idea. I'm not a shill for Google in some way. They don't pay me for this.
Inbox.google.com is amazing.
But I do like the fact that it's not API compatible isn't the right word, but the paradigm in Inbox is perfectly compatible with regular Gmail. You can send messages to be snoozed in Inbox and then switch over to normal Gmail and it'll still work fine. Then in Gmail, you can set up all your filters, switch over to Inbox, and it'll work fine.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And it's sort of annoying that all the features aren't available in both, but it works. It's 2 views into the same data set. It's really nice.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's amazing. It's so powerful that everything else just feels like it's in the Stone Age. If you're using Outlook, if you're using OS 10 Mail, if you're using any of these things, even Thunderbird, any of these things, it feels like you're living in the Stone Age.
Because it's more than just the mail client. And I know, there's a lot of concerns about Google. I'm not dismissing those. Those concerns are very legitimate about, sort of honoring privacy and what data they have. I'm sensitive to those as well, but I guess in this thing it's just so good, it's compelling, and that's sort of scary. Yeah, I know, I got it. But the fact that when my wife and I are looking at booking a trip, and so we made some reservations for an airline, and it sort of bundles those up together and creates, you have a trip to this location, and then when we book our hotel, I know it'll bundle it into the same thing. And so then when I go, I don't have to keep those things sort of in my active inbox. Oh gosh, in the active display, I can send them away because I know I can go back to my trips and sorted by location and by date. I can just sort of click and it just has everything automatically organized without me having to do any work.
Yeah. It's unbelievably.
It's really nice. So it's that added intelligence that they're doing. I don't want to say AI because I think that's overused, but the sort of intelligence they're doing to sort of bundle up things in a smart way is very nice.
I'm surprised that nobody has come out with a like pure desktop version of this, where it still just uses IMAP or whatever, but once you get the email, they do all sorts of this clever stuff.
It seems like it should be like I can't think of any obvious reason off the bat why, other than like making it monetized. Like I can't figure out any reason why it wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, one thing is the IMAP protocol is, just not designed. It's just not a modern protocol.
But you could do this with like putting stuff in folders and then having like a special format for how to name the folders that your client, like in the same way, like you put them in a folder, but those folders have a special naming scheme that your application understands. Yeah,
I think the issue is you either have to go all out, and by go all out, I mean you have to make an iPhone app, an Android app, a desktop. You have to do everything, or you have to like finagle everything into the IMAP protocol in a way where it doesn't look like garbage.
It's not horrible to use. Yeah, you're probably right.
I think that's the sort of probably the reason why it hasn't been done. But I mean, it's someone should try to figure it out. I mean, for the rest of our sakes.
Yeah, and I guess it is like, I don't know how, like I say that I really want it, but then since I already have it for free, like how much would I be willing to pay for, like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, other than at work, you'd only be targeting enterprise.
But then there's a lot of restrictions about that kind of stuff about work. Yeah, it's a whole. But anyways,
that's true.
If you're not, this is just like sort of my opportunity to like gush a little bit about how much I've realized I really do enjoy Inbox. Like there was a lot of weird stuff initially, but it really just kept getting better and better, and everything else just feels so bad to me in comparison.
Yeah, I agree. I feel the same way. So, at first, I thought it was awkward that you don't actually delete emails, but I've gotten used to that.
Yeah, and there's been times where I'm happy I didn't delete emails.
Yeah, that's true too.
Someone's gonna write in and tell us to just use text-based email, but yeah, it's okay.
That's right. Use Pine.
So, all right, time for cryptocurrency.
All right, let's do it.
So I guess cryptocurrency is just the catch-all term for the kind of new digital online currency that's backed by sort of cryptographic notions. But I guess it's not a completely accurate description, but we'll go with it. I think it's a pretty commonly used one.
Yeah, I think it's the namesake.
And so the most common one, the grandfather of them all, the father of them all, the root of the family tree was Bitcoin. There were previous digital currencies before that. Some famous, some infamous. But using this sort of, the important thing here and what we're going to talk about in all these cryptocurrencies is the distributed notion. The notion that it isn't held by a central source. So if you took things like...
like you could get credits like not a Macy's gift card, an e-gift card, or an iTunes gift card.
But even like PayPal, and previously there was this like eGold or whatever. Like, I think on all of those cases, I mean, I'm not that familiar with eGold, but like, they were held by a sort of central authority who like Jason's saying, you pay dollars and they give you a quote unquote gift card, which is some ledger that they keep that says, this dollar value was converted to this IOU. But if Macy's sort of goes away, the IOU is worthless.
That's right.
And so that's not true for cryptocurrency. They try to handle that in a different way. And you'll hear that, the distributed ledger. We'll talk more about it in a few minutes. But Bitcoin was sort of the, I guess, first one to get a lot of mainstream adoption. We've talked about it over the years. That sounds weird to say. But over the years, we've talked about it on Programming Throwdown several times and in several different contexts. And
and you know how much of it we bought? 0.
No, I have 0.05 of a Bitcoin that someone gave me.
That's right.
6 years ago. When I was like, I created a wallet. I was like, I'm going to try to mine a Bitcoin. And never managed to actually mine a Bitcoin on my laptop's CPU. And even at that time, I don't know if it was even possible, but there was somebody who had a website where if you gave them your ID, they would, send you, what at the time was, I think I'd have to go look up, but I think it was like a penny or a few cents. Well, today that's worth like $136. So somewhat internet stranger, thank you. I don't know who you were, but you gave me what is now worth $136, which is amazing.
I have an even, not an even, but I have a maybe opposing sad story, which is on my lab PC at university, I set it to mine a Bitcoin, and I left it running for I think like almost the whole winter break. But then by the time I came back, I'd already forgotten about it. And I don't know if I even mined a Bitcoin or not. Maybe I mined 10 and I just exited the process and I have no idea what I did.
Oh.
I know, right?
So Bitcoin was, actually solves a sort of well-known set of problems that didn't have good solutions about how to do this consensus, this distributed ledger stuff. And it was written by a guy who's not his real name. And no one actually, to this day, even as far as I know, the public doesn't know who this person is. Satoshi. I don't know if that's how you say it. But and this person they published a paper, they started doing this. They actually mined, a bunch of the first Bitcoin. And they sort of, for a while, were stewarding the kind of rollout of Bitcoin and how things were working. And then they sort of kind of went off the radar. Like they stopped doing anything. Now, maybe they just changed their handle, their username, and they still are active in the community, but not under the, not acting as the founder and creator of Bitcoin. But interestingly, like with Bitcoin's recent run up, which we'll talk about, why these have dollar values make sense or not later. But with the current value, I mean, the amount of Bitcoin which is associated with Satoshi is I haven't looked at it recently, but I mean, it's an astronomical sum of money that he has under his possession. But as far as people know, he's never actually exchanged any of those in for anything. He's never acted on the Bitcoins that he has.
Yeah, that's right. Isn't that wild that there's somebody who owns, I don't know what percent, but it's significant of Bitcoin. And basically at any moment he could start selling. But nothing has happened yet.
Which gets an interesting thing. Like, I guess at some point he would, if he started selling, like maybe the price would go down if it was significant. But I bet, I was going to say, I bet there's a bunch of people monitoring, and if they see his wallet ID, they immediately sell everything. So someone's saying that they've estimated it, like that, because it's not for certain, but about 1 million Bitcoin.
Wow.
Which at today's prices would be
is $2 billion. Right?
Yeah, that's crazy. Assuming that he could actually liquidate all of it without causing the market to go down.
Right. So let's talk about that without causing the value to go down. So actually, do you want to talk about mining first, and then? Well, sure. So
briefly, I want to talk about. So we're going to talk at a high level about a lot of this sort of interchangeably, but quickly, I just want to talk about also. So the other big one besides Bitcoin, as far as market cap goes, there's other things like Dogecoin and Litecoin and all that, but the other big one by market cap is Ethereum, and we won't talk a lot about it here. But Ethereum has some interesting properties that are slightly different than Bitcoin, in that you can sort of run automated scripts as part of the system, as part of the blockchain that it uses. And one of the most interesting experiments to me is this creation of the DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization, which was a series of scripts that allowed investors to sort of vote on taking on investments in other people who had ideas. And then famously the script had a bug in it, and people were a hacker was able to exploit that bug and sort of steal a ton of money from this DAO, this autonomous organization that people were voting in, that was this corporation, steal many millions of dollars, and hold the Bitcoin, or hold the Ethereum sort of not hostage, but hold it until they were going to presumably spend it. And instead, the whole Ethereum community basically decided to make a fork of the software to reach a consensus that basically those transactions were as if they never happened. So the DAO was never created, the guy never stole it, everyone just got their money back as if nothing happened, which is sort of crazy.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah, so mining Bitcoin, or just sort of mining cryptocurrency, is the notion of sort of doing some work on your computer. Some people talk about it as like searching for a prime number, where you don't really know where a prime number is going to occur next. They are, I'm going to mess this up because it has strong statements in number theory, but I always forget exactly what it is. But the distribution of primes is sort of like statistically known, but it's random. The interspacing is random. You never know how close or far you are to the next prime.
Yep, that's right.
Oh, good. I did it. Yay. And so to sort of find a prime, there's no good pattern. You should obviously sort of skip the even numbers, but aside from that, there's no real pattern. You kind of have to check every number along the way and see if it factors or not. And similarly, when you're mining Bitcoin, what's happening is a new Bitcoin is, and we'll just use Bitcoin in this example. A new Bitcoin is being created, and the person who successfully mines it gets to own that Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin itself is equivalent to trying to find a number which, combined with a bunch of transactions that have happened in Bitcoin and some hashing and cryptographic signing, but basically finding an input that you modify, finding a value that makes the result match a certain pattern. And when it matches that pattern, you reach a hash of a certain description, then you've sort of mined the Bitcoin. And so everybody is sort of working to try to mine the next Bitcoin block. And whoever finds it first, because it's sort of you're just randomly trying numbers, and whoever finds it first sort of gets that Bitcoin. And so it's like this big race to find it out. And this all gets really confusing. So we'll have a link to a little tutorial, like video and description, interactive, not of the full Bitcoin protocol, which is quite in depth, but of notionally how all of this works at sort of a simple level.
Right.
And you can check that out at anders.com/blockchain. This was really helpful to me. And the first time I kind of really understood a lot of this was sort of going through this and understanding, this is how this works.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to what we talked about in our cryptography episode, which is like these non-reversible mathematical operators, right? Like, for example, let's say I told you, what's 2 plus 2? Or let's do another reason. What's 1 plus 3? You'd say 4. It's very easy, right? Let's assume for a moment that there wasn't subtraction. Like addition was somehow not reversible. And I just gave you 4, and you had to give me the 1 and the 3. That's hard, right? Because it could be 0 plus 4, it could be 4 plus 0, it could be 2 plus 2, it could be 3 plus 1, it could be 1 plus 3, or if you get into negative numbers, let's forget about negative numbers for now. But there's all these different possibilities, and there's no way to know. Like, if I'm holding the 1 and the 3, and I'm asking you, hey, I have 2 numbers added up to 4, what are they? Or even if I give you 1, if I say, here's a 1, give me the number that, that plus 1 is equal to 4. And again, let's assume there's no subtraction. Like, we're in a universe without subtraction. There's nothing you really do. You just have to try all the numbers. Is 1 plus 1 4? Is 1 plus 2 4? Is 1 plus 3 4? Okay. Now, obviously, there's subtraction. You just invert the addition, right? But there are some operators you cannot invert. And so that's basically somebody gives you, they give you 2 of the 3 parts. They say like X, and then this operator, and then Y is equal to this new number, Z, but you don't know what Y is, and you have to kind of figure it out. And there's no good way to do it other than just trying a bunch of numbers. There's heuristics and things like that, but there's nothing like guaranteed. So yeah, you have to do a lot of work to get a Bitcoin, right? So you have to solve this mathematical problem. That's, again, it's easy to create, but if you're not the creator, it's hard to solve. And so that's a cost. Like, your computer's gonna have to spend some energy to do that, and you're gonna have to spend some time. The maintainer of that computer is gonna have to spend at least a little bit of time to do that. And that means that has value. So if you talk about, what gives something value, it's basically 3 things. The first is the amount of labor. Like, for example, diamonds are very hard to get. Like, I can't just, go outside in the backyard and scoop up some diamonds. And so because of that, there's going to be an intrinsic value there. Like, even if diamonds were like smelly and looked ugly, as long as somebody needed a diamond for something and it's very hard to get, then that person's going to spend a lot of money on it. Think of like a moon rock. Like, a moon rock is so hard to get. And so even though it pretty much just looks like a regular rock, it's very valuable, right? The next is sort of psychological value. Like, a diamond's going to be worth more than, say, an emerald. And it's really just because of, humanity. Like, we've sort of decided on that, right? There are some things, like an iPhone has a very large profit margin, which means they could make it cheaper and still make money. but they don't because they figure out that enough people are going to buy it at the high price. And that's psychological, right? Another one is the historical trend. So, if an iPhone is going for sale for, let's say, $500, even if something kind of drastic happens, unless there is kind of like a widespread panic, something that's public that really gets out there, things tend to just be worth what they're worth. Like there are things that kind of tend to just hold their value to some degree, or they depreciate, but it's kind of a known quantity, and the depreciation factor, there's some inertia there. And so those three things pretty much describe why anything costs what it does. It's some composition of those three factors, right? And so Bitcoin has, all three of them. There is a certain amount of labor to get a Bitcoin. The psychological value is it's been around for a long enough time, and enough people have kind of agreed, and enough people have turned it into money and back into Bitcoin that people are sort of mentally they're comfortable with it. And it has a trend, like it has some upward trajectory. It didn't just, become super valuable overnight. And if Bitcoin all of a sudden was worth, a cent, and then it jumped back to its original price, that would have a big impact. Like it would probably never recover because the trend is very important. Right?
Well, so
go ahead.
Yeah, the value of Bitcoin has shot up, because of a lot of speculation. People basically buying because they think it's going to go up because it has gone up.
Yeah, well, that's true. I guess. By the historical trend, I mean over the course of, let's say, a day or an hour or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Like if you knew that you could get a Bitcoin for half the price tomorrow, okay. Or even if you knew that there was just enormous volatility, then you probably wouldn't buy one. Unless you were just at that point, it's basically gambling, and gambling is kind of like a different sort of system, right?
Yeah, and you didn't sort of mention, but I mean, there's also the notion here of the use of a thing. So some stuff is valuable because it has, I guess you sort of said intrinsic value is the way that captures, but this thing is value to me because it gives me something. It either helps me do something.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I totally missed that, but that is the fourth piece of the puzzle.
Well, so I mean, you said intrinsic value, which is part of that. It's, it's gold is used in some industrial processes and it's useful. I mean, it's more expensive than its industrial uses, but even if they went away, it would still be useful to be able to gold is it doesn't tarnish and corrode very easily. So it's really great for, contacts on that's why the ends of headphone plugs are sometimes gold plated because they don't corrode and get worse over time, right? It has use. And in that way, you kind of do have use of Bitcoin, which we'll, talk about in a minute, but the distributed nature, the way it works, it has a value in that Jason and I can exchange money in a very low fee kind of way. And that has use and that does give it value.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it has some amount of utility. Especially, Patrick will talk about it later, but there's sometimes where Bitcoin's the only thing you can convert to. And so that gives it even more utility. So one thing people might ask is how is the price figured out, right? There's some of these psychological value, how do you measure that, right? It turns out you don't. So this is something that you cannot there's no closed form equation. You can't just plug in a bunch of things and get the value out. Instead, what happens is it's a dynamical system. So in other words, you might not know the equation for gravity, but you know that if you throw a rock up, it's going to come back down. And you might even be able to estimate how many seconds it's going to take to come down. You don't have to be a physicist or even know the equations or anything. You're just kind of observing and you have sort of a mental model, right? So this is the same way. So the Bitcoin is traded on an exchange similar to a stock or anything else. And in the case of stock, it's on the New York Stock Exchange or the London Stock Exchange or I think Shanghai or what have you. In the case of cryptocurrency, there's a variety of exchanges. There's Coinbase and Gemini here in America. Actually, Coinbase both of those are probably international, but there are some countries that can't use Coinbase. There's a list of different exchanges you can find online. And the way all of these exchanges work is the same. It's basically a double auction. So what that means is every, let's say, millisecond, the system looks at its orders, like who wants to buy and at what price. And it looks at its sell orders, who wants to sell and at what price. And it matches those people up. And there's a variety of strategies, but basically, I think the person who wants to buy at the highest price right there at that millisecond gets matched up with the person who wants to sell at the, I think at the highest price, if I remember correctly. Yeah, that's right. So the person who wants to buy at the highest price gets matched up with the person who wants to sell at the highest price. And then that transaction happens. Those people, assuming that the person who wants to buy at a higher price than the person who wants to sell, that transaction happens. And I think it happens at the seller's price. And then those two people walk away happy with their transaction. Then we take them out and we look at what's left. And we just keep doing this until the people who want to buy all want to buy for less than the most expensive seller, right? So if I want to sell for $1,
the least expensive seller. They want to buy for less than the least expensive seller.
Then the least, did I get that right? Then so if I want to sell for $1 and there's someone else who wants to sell for $2 and there's someone who's willing to buy for $1.50, yeah, you're right. Yeah. So eventually it's going to get to the point where there's a bunch of people who want to buy, but they all want to buy for, let's say, $1, and all the people who want to sell for $2. So now nobody can make a transaction. So then the system sort of ticks. Like it takes new orders and it starts like a new millisecond and it starts this whole process over again. And so what happens is, people put in orders and those orders can't be fulfilled. And their reaction is to put in a higher order if they really want whatever the person's selling. And so in this way, the double auction kind of self-heals. It self-regulates. Nobody really knows what the price should be, but it's this dynamical system that's constantly adapting.
But we say the price is the last successful transaction amount.
That's right. Yeah. I mean,
so that's the price at which we last knew that a transaction took place, and therefore two parties agreed that the value was that.
Right. Exactly. And there's all sorts of different inertia functions. Like, for example, I could crash the market by having two entities that I both own and having one sell to another one for a penny. Like, let's say something's worth $1,000 and I make a bunch of fake agents and I keep having them sell this product to each other for a penny. If I own all the agents, it looks like something's worth a penny, but it's really not. It's really me sort of gaming the system. And there's all sorts of inertia terms and things like that to compensate for that. And that's where the historical part comes in, is that would have to happen at a very high volume for a long time before they would say, oh, I guess this really is worth a penny. The other thing too is there's always an opportunity for someone else to be buying. I can't guarantee that I'm gonna buy my own thing. So,
But in this case, I mean, this is the exchange being fair, right? It has actually nothing to do with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin itself doesn't facilitate exchanging into dollars. What you sort of need is if Jason via some facility, Jason and I could agree in person that Jason's going to give me $20 and I'm going to give him $20. I'm going to send his wallet $20 worth of Bitcoin. We could do that in person. That's an exchange. But there's a lot of risks there. Like, one of us has to go first. Either Jason has to give me the $20 or I have to send the Bitcoin. And that causes a problem, which is why you have these exchanges, is because they act as a third party to sort of facilitate that transaction. Right. And so I've not checked on Coinbase, but I assume the way it works is basically I send my dollars to Coinbase when I agree to something. I sort of hold dollars in my account and I agree to let Coinbase take some of those and give them to someone else once that person has given the coins to Coinbase that they can give to me. And so they act as a broker.
Right.
They broker the deal to make sure that no one has to deal with the fact of someone flaking out.
Right. So when they, are doing this double auction, at that moment, they have power over both sides. I mean, they could theoretically take my money and take the other person's Bitcoin, but we trust them. There's a variety of sort of social systems in place to keep that from happening.
That's right. And so why are people wanting to convert their hard-earned cash? We talked about before, the Jason working his job selling popcorn. Why is he turning that into Bitcoin? And there's, a couple reasons. We talked about that this being distributed, there's no big bank, right? So Jason talked about the exchange should just take all your money and run. It turns out that banks could do that. And in the US, we have lots of different kinds of protections that try to prevent a bank from sort of going bankrupt. Oh dear. And taking all of your money. But, it has happened in the past. That's why those regulations are there.
Right.
But there's also lots of fees associated with lots of things that you do when you work with a bank. And the bank gets to control and set a lot of that stuff because you're sort of forced to, in some ways, in order to operate in society, to kind of use that. It's very hard to go around spending actual storing dollars under your mattress and then using them everywhere. And even if you were to do that, that's actually sort of dangerous because if you get robbed and someone looks under your mattress, all your money's gone.
Yep.
And so all of these things come into play. And so Bitcoin is nice because it's distributed. There isn't a central bank. And so it's very, very easy if sort of one Bitcoin was trying to charge, there is a little bit of we won't go into it because it's complicated on how sort of transaction fees work in the system. But they're much lower than sort of paying with a credit card, for instance. And so if Jason were to try to get greedy and charge a higher transaction fee for me to use his services to transact Bitcoin, then other people would just sort of undercut him because it's this very competitive, decentralized thing. There's no reason to use Jason versus just random other people. And so
yeah, exactly.
That makes it really resistant to sort of one person acting in bad faith, one person doing bad. You need a consensus of people. You need very, very large numbers of, in this case we say people, but it's actually computers, agents. You need a large number of them to be essentially agreeing to collude and commit bad things. And we're sort of trusting that because we think that lots and lots of different people with all different desires aren't going to want to collude to cheat me, that this is a safe thing. The other thing is that people say, oh, Bitcoin is anonymous, and that's why it's useful because it's really good for buying drugs or whatever that you want to be anonymous. But it's actually being very careful. It is not anonymous. So it is pseudonymous, which is that no one sees my social security number or my name. It's just my wallet, my address, my special series of numbers that's unique to me. But no one knows that that is me. And so I can go online, I can have people send money to that address, I can send money from that address, and no one knows it's me. But they do know it's that address. That's different than anonymous, because anonymous, you wouldn't know who it was. You don't know who it is, but you know that it's the same person between any two given transactions.
Exactly.
And the reason why that's really important, so for instance, like we said at the beginning, Satoshi, if he were to get rid of all his Bitcoin and the price didn't go down, they'd be worth billions of dollars, right? The reason we know that Satoshi owns those is because they're the very first, we know whose unique fingerprint created those first Bitcoins, and we can see that fingerprint doesn't occur in subsequent transactions. So those Bitcoins, most of them weren't sort of moved around. And so we assume that must be him, and now we can monitor and say if any Bitcoins come out of that address, then he must be selling his Bitcoin. And in that way, it's not anonymous, but it is pseudonymous.
Right. And if let's say hypothetically there's a certain Bitcoin address that's buying being used in all sorts of drug deals and stuff like that, and the police catch a drug dealer, and when they catch him, they get his computer. They can get his Bitcoin wallet ID, and they can look in the history and see all the transactions he's done.
Well, I mean, it gets worse, right? So if someone were to, these hackers send money to my Bitcoin, right? As long as if they continue to sort of move Bitcoin around for purely digital, other pseudonymous or anonymous systems, there's no problem. But fundamentally, ultimately, Jason wants to buy an iPhone or an Android phone, maybe one of those cool, slick S8s or whatever.
Nice.
He wants to buy a phone. And so he needs hard, cold Benjamins, dollars. And so at some point, Jason wants to, after doing this massive hacking scheme, he wants to convert his Bitcoin to dollars. Now, it turns out this becomes a dilemma because someone now has to give him US dollars, US currency. And once you do that, you tend to be something that's more regulated by the government. And so they probably have some sort of log. So as soon as he tries to do business with a business, oh, that was confusing. As soon as he tries to exchange his Bitcoins with a business that either needs to mail him something, send him US currency, or most foreign currencies have the same rules. As soon as he needs to touch sort of physical goods, then if the police go to that business and basically say, you have to give us your records, they have to comply. And now people will figure out, they'll be able to match Jason's account with his person.
Yeah, exactly.
So pseudonymous, useful in a lot of circumstances, but not a great idea if you really want to commit crime.
Yeah, exactly. So how does it work? So basically, what's to stop me from just saying, oh, Patrick gave me $1 million, everybody. So basically, it's similar to cryptography. It's similar to the public-private key stuff that we talked about in that episode. So definitely go and check that episode out. But just to kind of rehash it, everyone has a private key. If someone gets your private key, they can take all your money, right? So assuming that doesn't happen, so with my private key, I sign some package. Is it? I guess it's a blockchain or
no, a message. So you create a transaction. You create a transaction that says, "I want to pay Patrick lots of money." Right.
I want to pay Patrick all the money that I got for deploying this worm.
No! I don't want that money.
Yeah. So I want to give Patrick a bunch of money, and I sign it with my private key. So one thing about this whole blockchain is that everyone has the entire state. So imagine if you went to Facebook.com or you went to, let's say, Yahoo.com, and the first time you went to Yahoo.com, they gave you the entire database, like with everything, and they're like, "Hang on, buddy, we need to give you the entire database. It's like everyone's records, everyone's name, everything." And then you would get all of that, and then they would say, "Okay, now what do you want to do at Yahoo?" And you wouldn't even have to contact them anymore, other than just to get updates, because you have literally the entire backend.
And I know this to be true because my 0.05 Bitcoin that I had on an old laptop that I recently got back out, I downloaded the client, migrated my wallet, and then had to wait for, many hours. I think it was like a day or two while my computer basically downloaded the entire state of the blockchain and fast forwarded to make sure that there was no transaction so there was a transaction from anonymous kind internet stranger to me 6 years ago. And that there was no transaction anywhere in the blockchain after that sort of my 0.05 Bitcoin were sent somewhere else.
Right, exactly. So imagine you have, let's say, a SQL database or any type of database, right? You're going to put commands on that database. You're going to say, like, insert a row, alter this column, insert this new row, delete this row. And just think of all these like SQL commands, right? Now imagine if you kept a history of all the commands you gave this database ever. Well, then you could recreate the database, right? It's probably not the most efficient way, but it works, right? If you took all the commands you ever sent to your database and you ran all those same commands on another database, you would end up with the same data on both, right? Hopefully, unless there's like a RAND or something. So that's basically what's happening is everyone's getting all the commands such that when they've finished, they all have exactly the same database. And that database has everything. Like it has how much money everybody has at any given time.
That's right.
It has everything.
It's a ledger, right? Where maybe ledger isn't a commonly known term anymore. But it's so when I say that someone sent me some Bitcoin, unlike actual, dollars, where if I say Jason gave me $1, then I typically mean he took a printed physical piece of paper with a unique serial number and gave it to me. when I say someone gave, if I were to give, zero point 0.1 Bitcoin to Jason, I don't actually give him a cryptographic hash or anything. I'm not transacting with him a unique something. What I'm doing is sending a message into the globally replicated ledger, this running account, this log as Jason was describing. I'm saying there, hey, at some point my account has been tabulated to have one whole Bitcoin, maybe because of mining, maybe because somebody sent me something, because I did something, a service for them or whatever. And I want to send, whatever I said previously, I've forgotten my example. I want to send however many worth of my Bitcoin I want to now send to Jason's address. But I don't actually, nothing goes to him. Just now the ledger reflects that now he has some of the money that I had previously. So my account sort of says minus 0.1 Bitcoin and Jason's account says plus 1 Bitcoin. And that's recorded in the ledger globally in this replicated state.
Right. And so when Patrick does that, so because everyone has everything, the only thing everyone doesn't have is all the private keys, of course, right? But everyone has everything else, right? So Patrick signs it with his private key. He encrypts it, and he encrypts the message, and then also some way to verify that it's been to some way that when you decrypt it, you know that you've decrypted it correctly. Right? I forgot what that's called, but some set of bits there, right? Some magic bits. Then that message goes out to everybody. And it spreads like virally, like everyone just starts sending it to each other. And then everyone starts using their Patrick's public key to decrypt his message and read it. And so the decrypted message will say something like give Jason $1 or give Jason a Bitcoin, but it'll also have some way to verify that it was decrypted correctly, right? Because what you wouldn't want is someone to encrypt it incorrectly, and when you decrypt it, it says give someone $1 million, and you just do it, right? So there's some secret key, some secret set of bits that have to be encrypted a certain way. So if people get it, they decrypt it, and it seems legit, they apply it, right? If they decrypt it and it's just total garbage, then they reject. They say like we're not accepting this transaction. We're not accepting this message. And then at that point, it's kind of like a democracy. So it happens extremely quickly, and if you've signed it correctly, a ton of people are accepting it, and in the opposite case, a ton of people are rejecting it. And so in that way, it sort of heals itself.
So
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, just as a sort of side topic, you were talking about databases working that way. Actually, a whole class of modern databases do work that way. They're called log replicated storage. And so
cool.
They actually do work by essentially record, and it's a way to distribute to other people for exactly those reasons, that what the current state of the database is. And so you sort of send out a proposed change as a log, and then once other people confirm they've received that, then you actually reflect that in your current state. And there's ways of compacting the log, so you don't have to keep the whole transactional history. But anyways, this is a side topic. But if you're interested, you can look it up.
Yeah, log replicated databases. So there's this question of like, what happens if I try to be really clever, and I say, I go to two different machines, and I say, give this other account that I also own $1 from this other account. Like I have account A and account B, and I go on two different machines, and I say, hey, A gave B $1. And I do it both at the same time, right? And in this way, I think I can somehow like double my money, right? Well, that's not going to happen. What's going to happen is, and Patrick, you could correct me on this, but basically, there's going to be some type of like master election process. So a bunch of computers are going to get the first command, a bunch are going to get the second command. It's going to be some kind of banter back and forth. But then at the end of the day, there's some kind of like Byzantine resolution system that's going to eventually, it's like an unstable equilibrium, that's going to eventually cause one of those two transactions to fail. And that's basically the gist of how that works. So there's a lot of good things. There's also a lot of kind of bad and ugly parts of Bitcoin.
So, I mean, yeah, everyone hears this, like, the Silk Road was famous. Is that what it's called? Yeah, the Silk Road. And, just ways of sort of extorting people for money, moving the money around. And then if you can find, like I said, it's once you try to convert to something physical, there's sort of an endpoint. But this is a common criminal thing. Like, this is always true. If you steal money, you need some way of sort of spending the money without being noticed and being able to move the money around without being tracked, or else people can figure out that you committed some crime. They can put two and two together. And Bitcoin, I know it's not my opinion that it really, the pseudonymous thing is sort of useful there, but it isn't like this is fundamentally going to ruin the FBI or whatever investigative agency you have in your country. Like, it's not going to ruin their ability to find criminals. It does facilitate, sort of, along with some other technologies, it can make it harder, but it doesn't seem to me, as long as if people end up, if they can't live their whole life, solely on digital goods and services, then, eventually they'll try to spend the money and you can catch them at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it does require like an international effort.
It can.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just that I think what will happen is that more businesses that do goods and services in Bitcoin will probably get more regulation that they already have on dollars. But I don't think that's a bad thing for Bitcoin. That's just a sign that, sort of Bitcoin is growing up, or Ethereum is growing up. Like, all of these will begin to be regulated.
Yeah.
And right now it's a sort of temporary loophole, is I guess what I see. Long term, it's not a big deal. The same thing, like, in the US, gambling is illegal. And so there's this threat. If I send dollars to, I don't know where the, online gambling sites are, but some other country, then somehow when I get dollars back, that gets recorded and I have to sort of explain where it came from. But if I sort of send it in Bitcoin, do some transactions and get the Bitcoin back, like, no one has to know that those Bitcoins that I got back were from gambling winnings. And so it's actually, in some ways it's easier to convert it back to US currency. But again, same thing as I said before. I think eventually the regulations will sort of catch up on this more. It just seems like a continuous thing on the internet, the cat and mouse game. So yeah, it'll probably make things harder, but don't do bad things. You'll get caught.
Yeah, exactly. So this technology in and of itself is really amazing. And one thing that's kind of amazing is Ethereum in particular created this thing called the Ethereum Virtual Machine. And basically, you can use, the Ethereum messaging platform and all of that to do other things. Like, for example, you could make your own set of currency. Like, let's say, for example, I want... I'm trying to think of like a good example for this. Like, let's say I want to do some type of votes. So I want to go and people can do a certain amount of work. They can get one of these tokens, and they can use that token to give it to different accounts, and each account represents voting for a different person. So you can kind of do pseudonymous voting. You could do all sorts of donations and fundraising and all of that. That's a little bit more direct application. In other words, you could set up little credits and people can exchange, Bitcoin or let's say Ether for these credits. And then in exchange, you're going to look at whoever has those credits and give them like some part of your company or some like their donation.
This is how
you'll get something back.
This is how the DAO, and that's how you're supposed to say it, because that sounds like Dow Jones. But the DAO in Ethereum was supposed to work. You sent money to the DAO, and they gave you a DAO token, which was different than the Ethereum you sent, but it allowed you to cast votes. Like, you got a unique token based on how much you contributed, and then they would put up measures for voting, and the system would count how many unique tokens it saw for any given measure to decide if it passed or failed.
Right. Yep. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty early on. Also, Ethereum is totally open source. I don't know about Bitcoin, if it's open source or not.
Yes.
It is? Okay, yeah. So you could, like, especially if you run a company, like if you're doing this in enterprise, you could install your own fork of Ethereum on all your machines, and then you could use it for, like, an anonymous message board, like complain about your boss, and you can't know it's you or something. I don't know. But you could set up a blockchain and have sort of pseudonymous voting and messaging and things like that, which is kind of cool. So I expect a lot of cool things to come out of this technology, and that's probably a good point to sort of wrap it up.
So I want to make one thing. I said log replicated search, but that if you are going to go search on it, it's log structured databases. Sorry.
Log structured?
Yeah, if you search up the other thing, no results come up. It's log structured.
Oh, cool. Log structured storage. Yeah, I've never even heard of this.
All right. Well, till next time.
Yeah, have a good one. This was a bit of a long episode, but we had a lot of cool stuff to talk about with this. It's super interesting. It's hard to wrap your head around, but I think it's amazing, and hopefully you guys could bear with our 90-minute show or however long it's going to end up being. Thanks a lot for all of your support. Thanks for liking our posts on all the different social media, and thanks for your emails. We've gotten some really good suggestions. We'll definitely take advantage of that and cover them in future episodes. So have a good one.
The intro music is Axo by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.